Hey, welcome. Today, we're going to talk about something that affects every single decision you make: cognitive biases. These are the secret shortcuts your brain is taking all the time. And trust me, they shape your reality in ways you probably don't even see.
So let's just kick things off with a huge question. Why do incredibly smart people so often do things that, looking back, seem totally irrational? Well, the answer isn't about intelligence. It's about being human. These little mental glitches, they're universal. They're practically baked into our brain's operating system.
Okay, so what exactly is a cognitive bias? It's not just a random mistake, you know? It's a systematic, predictable pattern of thinking that steers us away from a purely logical judgment. So think of it this way. It's not really a bug in your brain's software. It's more like a built-in feature that was designed for speed, not always for 100% accuracy.
So here's the game plan for this explainer. First, we're going to look at why these shortcuts even exist. Then we'll dive into 4 huge problems our brains are constantly trying to solve, and we'll look at a classic bias tied to each one. And then at the end, we'll talk about what we can actually do to outsmart our own minds.
Right, so this is absolutely the key point. Our brains didn't just develop these shortcuts, they're often called heuristics, for no reason. They were a survival tool. They helped our ancestors make split-second decisions in a world that was just full of information and threats. So really, they aren't bugs, they're features that evolved to solve some pretty fundamental problems.
And here they are, the big 4. First, there is just way too much information flooding our senses at any given moment. Second, we had this deep need to find meaning in all that chaos, to make sense of the world. Third, we just don't have time to sit and think about every little thing. We need to act fast. And finally, number 4, we can't possibly remember everything, so our brain has to pick and choose what's worth storing. Pretty much every single bias we have is a mental shortcut that helps solve one of these problems.
Let's dive into that first problem: information overload. I mean, think about it. Your brain is getting hit with millions of bits of data every single second. It can't process it all. It just can't. So it has to filter, right? It focuses on what it thinks is important. And that filtering, well, that's where things start to get interesting.
And a perfect, and I mean perfect, example of this filtering is confirmation bias. This is our brain's natural tendency to go looking for proof that we're already right. It's like putting on a special pair of glasses that only lets you see the facts that support what you already believe, while making all the contradictory stuff totally invisible.
Come on, you've totally felt this, right? When you're searching for something online, which links do you click? The ones that look like they're gonna agree with you. Or when you're in an argument, you latch onto the points that prove your side, and you kind of just brush off the rest. That is confirmation bias in the wild. It's a handy shortcut, sure, but it's also how we get trapped inside our own echo chambers.
Okay, on to the next big problem: not enough meaning. So once we've filtered all that information, our brains are in a huge rush to connect the dots and build a story that makes sense. We are basically pattern-seeking missiles. The only problem is, sometimes we see patterns in stories that aren't actually there.
And you know, there's a fantastic story that explains this next bias perfectly. During World War II, the Allies were desperate to make their bomber planes stronger. So they had engineers carefully study every single plane that actually managed to fly back home from a combat mission.
And as they mapped out all the damage on these returning planes, a really clear pattern started to show up. The bullet holes were all clustered on the wings, down the main body of the plane, and around the tail. But the engines, they were almost completely untouched. So the military commanders looked at this data and asked the obvious question, okay, where do we add the armor? I mean, it seems simple, right? Just look at where all the bullet holes are and reinforce those spots.
But then a statistician named Abraham Wald stepped in and basically said, hold on a minute. He pointed out this huge, glaring flaw in their logic. They were only looking at the planes that survived. The most important data, the information from the planes that never came back, was completely missing. And this is the absolute core of what we call survivorship bias.
So here's the brilliant insight. Wald told them the armor shouldn't go where all the bullet holes are. It has to go where the bullet holes aren't. Why? Because any plane that got hit in the engine never made it back. Those were the fatal shots. By focusing only on the survivors, they were about to reinforce the strongest parts of the plane and leave the most vulnerable parts exposed. All right, so our brains filter information, and they create meaning from it. But we also have to act, and fast. Our brain is designed to jump to conclusions, to make those split-second judgments.
And while that's awesome for, not getting eaten by a lion, in our modern world, it can lead to some serious overconfidence.
And this leads us to the one and only Dunning-Kruger effect. It is such a fascinating paradox. Basically, it's the tendency for people who have low skill in something to wildly overestimate how good they are. And on the flip side, the real experts often underestimate their own abilities.
This chart just shows it so clearly. Over on the left, you've got the novice. Their actual skill level is low, but look at their confidence, their perceived ability. It's through the roof. They literally don't know enough to realize how much they don't know. Then, on the right, you've got the expert. Their actual ability is incredibly high, but notice their perceived ability is a bit lower. They're so aware of all the complexities and nuances of their field that they're much more humble about what they actually know.
Okay, let's hit our last problem, memory. Your brain simply cannot store every single thing that happens to you. It's impossible. So when we look back on something, we aren't replaying a perfect video recording. Instead, our brain reconstructs the memory, and it only saves the bits and pieces it thinks are the most useful or maybe the most surprising.
And this brings us right to hindsight bias. You know this feeling. It's that "I knew it all along" moment you have after something happens. We have this really powerful tendency to look back on things that have already occurred and feel like they were way more predictable than they actually were at the time.
And you see this everywhere. After a stock market dips, everyone says the signs were so obvious. After a political upset, all the experts claim they saw it coming from a mile away. After your team loses the big game, every fan on the planet knew the coach made the wrong call from the start. It's just our brain trying to make the world feel a little more orderly and predictable than it really is.
So, after all that, after seeing how our brains filter, invent meaning, jump to conclusions, and rewrite our memories, what on earth can we do about it? How do we start to outsmart our own programming? Well, the first and honestly the most important step is just being aware that it's happening.
So, here are the big things to remember. First off, you can't just turn your biases off. It doesn't work that way. Remember, they are a fundamental feature of your brain, not some bug you can patch. But just knowing they exist, that's a superpower. That awareness gives you the chance to hit pause, to question your own gut reactions. It lets you slow down your thinking and ask yourself, wait a minute, am I only looking at the bullet holes on the planes that made it back?
And that's our quick tour of your brain's hidden shortcuts. We've seen just a few of the ways our minds work behind the scenes. So I'll leave you with a question to chew on. Now that you know about these things, which one of these biases are you going to start looking out for in your own thinking first?